It's time now for County-Wide, a special presentation of Yavapai Broadcasting News. Join Paul David and Brad Miller as they talk with our community's leaders, newsmakers, and people in the know. You'll hear about the hot topics that affect all our lives here in Yavapai County. And now, here's today's County-Wide.
My favorite.
Welcome to the program. It is County-Wide, and we're happy to have you with us today. Joining us in studio is Yavapai Humane Society Executive Director Ed Boakes. We're going to talk about Pitbulls today. Ed did, I regard it as a fascinating column, a regular feature that he writes for the Daily Courier in Prescott, and I spotted an item in there, and before I was done reading it, I called Ed, and I said, you've got to come on the show and share this with our listeners, and he was kind enough to do that. So we will today. We're going to talk about Pitbulls and kind of an informal survey that Ed did with folks that he comes into contact with at the Humane Society, and some of his findings. Very, very interesting, I thought, and perhaps you will as well. First, though, as we record our program today, it is live as we speak here on June 20th. It'll replay a few times, so this will become data, but I think it's important with the Dose fire continuing to burn as we do our program. A lot of folks are concerned about pets, big and small, livestock, all the way down to the kitties and the dogs in the house. And so let's talk a tiny bit about that.
Sure.
First, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming in. I know what's a busy, busy time for you and everybody in our county these days. But I guess just that Humane Society, I'm sure, is a player in what's happening with the fire and the displacement of pets.
Right. Coincidentally, in preparation and in anticipation for what we knock on wood, hope is not a big fire season, but has the potential of being. We just had erected 25 brand new kennels to be able to accommodate animals that are going to be evacuated or lost during this disaster. So far, we've been very, very fortunate in that we have seen very few animals coming in as a direct result.
Right.
But our concern is that a lot of animals scared by the fire have run off and will ultimately be caught and brought into the shelter.
Okay.
So we're hoping that folks have microchipped their animals, because if they microchip, we just very recently, the Humane Society gave microchip scanners to all the animal control departments so they can scan these animals in the field and get them home directly without bringing them to a shelter.
Gotcha. But you're ready.
We're ready.
If they do end up there. And in a way, you think about a dog being terrified. It's similar to the July 4th fireworks
very much.
Situation.
The 5th of July and January 2nd are the two busiest days at any animal shelter in the country, because the animals are scared to death of loud noises, dogs particularly, and they will break through a plate glass window to get away, and they end up at shelters.
They run off, and hopefully that's the outcome, as they end up with you. Okay, so Humane very, very ready for what is happening with the fire, displaced animals, pets, particularly those who've run away, gotten out, and all of the confusion that's kind of been happening over the last couple of days. Let's get to the subject at hand. I just found this. Now, you do a regular column for the Courier.
I do, every Wednesday.
Okay, and as part of that, 2-3 weeks ago, you did kind of an informal survey. Tell me a little about how that worked.
I did. I was asking our community what they thought about pit bulls, and what I shared with them was my findings that disturbed me. I'm actually a pit bull proponent, or aficionado, if you will. I love the breed. I think they have a lot of wonderful characteristics. But being in the shelter business for nearly 30 years now, I've noticed that the vast majority of animals that come into our shelters across the United States are pit bulls, and the vast majority, in fact, about 50% of the animals that come into the Yavapai Humane Society are pit bulls, and about 47% of all the dogs that are euthanized in our community are pit bulls. So I'm seeing that there's too much of a good thing. Some people might say a bad thing, but is there a way of controlling the disproportionate number of pit bulls that are being killed in our shelters?
I want to reiterate what you just said, because I think it's really our starting point for the whole discussion and this survey that you did, and the point that I think you're trying to make. 51% of all dogs rescued that show up in your shelter,
right,
are pit bulls, and nearly as many, half of the 47% of all dogs euthanized are pit bulls.
That's correct.
To me, that's very dramatic.
Right.
There's a lot of breeds. Half are of one basic breed.
Nationally, it's estimated that pit bulls make up 3.3 to 4% of all dog breeds. So when you consider the fact that they only make up about 3 to 4% of all dog breeds, and they're 50% or more, I mean, I think we're sort of an anomaly. That's a big number, but most shelters, it's 60% or more are pit bulls.
So even greater.
Much.
One of the numbers that you got here, and I don't want to jump too far ahead. I'm kind of reciting some of your numbers back to you and then asking you to expand a little bit on it. You had 82 responses to your query, so quite a few folks. And of those, 82%, 67 people favor a mandatory pit bull spay-neuter ordinance in the community, something that I guess the city council perhaps could take up, or a city council could take up.
Or the county board of supervisors.
Okay. But some legislative body would push toward this. So 82% think pit bull mandatory. Do we have any numbers on mandatory spay-neuter across the board?
Across the nation? Well, in this particular survey,
similar question. Take the pit bull breed out of that question. I'm just curious. 17%
of the folks who responded to this informal, unscientific survey favored spay-neuter for all dogs and cats.
Okay.
Across the United States, spay-neuter ordinances are pretty unusual. I just moved here from Los Angeles, where we passed a citywide spay-neuter ordinance for all breeds, and dogs and cats. And it's being met with some mixed results.
Sure.
So my thinking is that having a targeted, I'm sort of a strategic planner by thinking, or by trade, and I'm thinking that if we can target the animals that are dying the most in our shelters, which predominantly are feral cats and pit bulls, if we can come up with strategies to reduce the numbers of unwanted animals in those two categories, we can virtually eliminate euthanasia in our shelters.
It almost seems like the solution is at odds with the problem until you dissect it, as you've done. And that's what I found to be kind of fascinating by I guess breed targeting or specific breed targeting for spay and neuter, you help eliminate that long-term problem. Did you run into anybody during your survey that felt, oh my gosh, Ed, you're trying to do a terrible thing, you're trying to wipe out a specific species of dog?
As a matter of fact, there is a anti-breed specific legislation, confederacy, if you will, across the United States. I mean, it is very politically incorrect to suggest in most animal welfare circles breed-specific legislation. Most breed-specific legislation is very discriminatory in that it targets pit bulls as a dangerous breed. While I understand that there is some data that supports that, I think they're no more dangerous than the people who own them. And it's the deed, not the breed. My motivation for suggesting legislation like this is the sheer number that are dying in our shelters, and that's what tears me up. And how can we reduce the number of animals that are dying?
There needs to be a solution, and that's what you're working toward.
We're not killing a lot of dachshunds. We're not killing a lot of cocker spaniels. Or, it's this particular breed that are dying in our shelters.
I want to ask you more about that, and we'll do it when we come back. Let's take a short break. Our guest today, Ed Boakes, the Executive Director, Yavapai Humane Society. The number there is 928-445-2666. Ed's extension is 21. We'll have more with Ed Boakes after this.
Here in northern Arizona and throughout Yavapai County, people count on Orkin Pest Control. With over 100 years of combined experience, nobody knows how to protect your home or your business from harmful or annoying pests like the Orkin Man. To start service, contact your Northern Arizona Orkin Pest Control. In the Verde Valley, call 567-5100 or Orkin Pest Control in the Prescott area at 775-8772.
Know what?
What?
Since I got adopted, I've learned a lot about these humans.
I know. I mean, check out these two. It's Flirt City over here.
Yeah, I noticed that. It looks like my human is definitely into your human.
Oh, look! I think she's getting his number.
Nice.
Your human's got some sweet moves.
Takes after his dog. Oh, look, they're doing that thing where they put their arms around each other.
She kicked up a leg. It's like in the movies.
That's awesome. Looks like we're going to be hanging out a little bit more.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life.
Ready or not, here I come.
Take time to be a dad today.
Daddy, I'm gonna find you.
Welcome back to the program. Again, it is countywide. Ed Boakes is here. Yavapai Humane Society. Ed's the executive director, and again, his number there, the number there is 445-2666, and Ed's extension is 21. Before we went to the break, you talked about it's the deed, not the breed. But then these numbers suggest, you know, that there's more dogs in shelters. There's more maybe an outsized proportion of pit bulls are involved in some of these attacks that we hear, or maulings, or incidents. And if I understand what you're saying, it's because what I don't get, I guess, is this. People, I'm going to get a pit bull because he's a mean son of a gun, and he's going to protect my house, and he's going to keep, bad guys say he's going to keep the cops away from my drugs, good guys say he's going to keep the bad guys away from my kids, and how much of it is, I've made this dog into the mean son of a gun that I want him to be. And to me, it seems like that's the confusion amongst the public, especially those who think pit bulls are bad dogs.
Right. And I think it's the latter. I think that when you go back to the origin of the breed and the fact that they were bred to fight in pits, that's where they get the name pit bulls, they were deliberately bred to be aggressive animals. Now, I think over the course of generations, a lot of those tendencies have been bred out of them. The pit bull was the first dog breed to ever win the Congressional Medal of Honor for heroism. Sergeant Stubby was his name, actually saved platoons of American soldiers in World War II. Just an extraordinary dog. Petey from the Little Rascals, where we grew up, you know, loving that dog.
Right.
So I think there's both. There's people who are gravitated. I think it's the vast majority of people. The reason we have so many pit bulls is because it's a wildly popular breed. They're very affectionate. They're very loyal. They're they're good-looking breeds. People just love them. But there are bad elements of our community that want to keep the police away or whatever, and they will put a line of defense called their dogs, aggressive junkyard dogs, some of which are pit bulls. So I think the predicate of your question, it needs to be questioned, is can the data be trusted? Is it truly pit bulls that are causing these problems? And I think probably it can be justified. But having been in this industry for 30 years, when I was down in Maricopa County running animal care and control there, Channel 3 contacted me at one point and asked if they could do a story on pit bulls and how bad they are. And I turned the tables on them and I said, why don't you do a story about is there a media bias? And they did. And they actually did the story and recognized that there was a media bias against pit bulls. And so the reputation, I think, that we're fighting, those of us in the shelter who have all these wonderful, wonderful animals that would make great, great pets, is this perception that's been created by the media that these are somehow dangerous dogs or you don't want these dogs. And that's probably why a lot of them end up in the shelter as well.
Did, if I may, the Michael Vick case really, you know, for anybody who wasn't kind of paying attention up until that point, a lot of people were. Certainly folks in the dog lover community. To this day, that man's a lightning rod. I wonder, though, if ultimately his case, not what he did, but his case may have shown a brighter light. You mentioned something during our break that 20 years ago, fighting dogs that were trained to do what Michael Vick and his guys were up to with the fighting and wagering on it. Those dogs couldn't be rehabilitated very easily, whereas a lot of the
Right.
dogs in Vic's stable have been.
They've all been rehabilitated and are now living in loving homes.
What's the, how?
Well,
what's the
again, I think that the tendencies that were bred into these dogs originally, over time, have been bred out.
Okay.
Pit bulls, there's no such breed as a pit bull, as a matter of fact. I mean, there's American Staffordshire. I mean, there's 3 or 4 different breeds and crosses, and we refer to them as pit bulls or bully breeds. But they're not a breed; they're a conglomeration of breeds. And being a conglomeration of breeds, the more they're bred, you can either breed into or out of. And I think there was a very bad time in American history where these dogs were very specifically and scientifically bred to be dangerous, to be fighters and to kill. But I think over time, as that's become illegal, and more the people who are doing it now are doing it in their backyard, and they breed my dog with your dog.
Yeah.
You know, they're not. It's not scientific. It's, you know, so a lot of those dangerous tendencies have been bred out of the dogs,
Right.
and that's why I think you're seeing them revert back at the turn of the century, the 19th century. They were referred to as nanny dogs. People use these dogs to raise their children. You know, when they're not in the room, they leave them with their kids.
Yeah.
Well, most people would be
Find
abhorred.
I'll be honest with you. A family member was looking to adopt a dog and ran into what you did, not in Prescott, but at a place in the Phoenix Valley, and there were many, many pit bulls, and she just wouldn't adopt one. And in a way, I understood it, and in a way, I thought that's probably a good choice for you because you're never going to have full trust in the dog.
Right.
Not the dog's fault.
Exactly right.
A societal thing maybe, a media thing maybe,
Right.
but I just thought that probably, because I kind of was like, well, but, and I thought,
Right.
no,
Yeah.
if you're not comfortable, then who knows what might be imprinted on the animal.
Totally, absolutely correct. If you have the least bit of concern or fear with respect to any dog, don't adopt it.
And that takes us back
Because
to
the dog senses that, and the dog will always be challenging you or members of your family.
They pick up on these
Absolutely.
things. There's a T-shirt that's out there amongst the dog crowd, if I may, to paraphrase. In the 70s we had Dobermans. In the 80s we had Shepherds. In the 90s we had Rottweilers. Now we've got Pit Bulls. Do you kind of see that ladder as telling?
I do see that ladder as a reality in the media, where they always have to have a devil dog, always have to have some sort of monster in our community, and today it is the pit bull. Having said that, I've never in 30 years have seen a shelter full of Dobermans or a shelter full of German Shepherds or a shelter full of any of these other breeds. I do see shelters full of pit bulls. So again, brings me back to the original premise of my question is there too much of a good thing?
Right.
What can we do to curb the killing that's happening in our shelters? If it's pit bulls that people are abandoning at the shelter and don't want, could we reduce those numbers? And should we, as a responsible, humane community, reduce those numbers? And is spay-neuter the solution? And the question is, should it be mandatory or should it be just free to anybody who wants it? We're going to be trying both.
Right.
We just secured a grant that we're going to be announcing probably in September.
Ed, let's do this. Let's take a short break.
Sure.
And when we come, let's talk about some of these resolution scenarios and where it goes from here.
You got it.
Let's go ahead and pause for just a minute. We'll come back. And Ed Boakes, Executive Director, Yavapai Humane Society, our guest on Countywide. We'll be back right after this.
Here in northern Arizona and throughout Yavapai County, people count on Orkin Pest Control. With over 100 years of combined experience, nobody knows how to protect your home or your business from harmful or annoying pests like the Orkin Man. To start service, contact your Northern Arizona Orkin Pest Control. In the Verde Valley, call 567-5100 or Orkin Pest Control in the Prescott area at 775-8772.
Wow, these are really good.
You act surprised. Practice makes perfect.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who don't need perfection. They need you.
So, I got this new family, and I don't know what it is about this one, but she can't seem to put down that toy all day long. Tap, 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 tap. Oh, and she even talks to it. She talks to that more than she talks to him. What's up, bro? Nice shirt. Who's she talking to? Her mom? She talks to her mom a lot.
Welcome back to the program. Ed Boakes, our guest on Countywide today. Yavapai Humane Society, and Ed's the executive director. The number there, number there is 445-2666, and Ed's extension is 21. Have you taken these findings or any of this information in this survey and gone to, you mentioned the county supervisors, City of Prescott, I guess, council, or wherever it would go. Have you approached any of those kinds of decision makers about this?
I have not. I did approach the sheriff's office and the police departments of Prescott Valley and the city of Prescott. And the response I got from them is, well, why don't you find out what the public feels? Because our demographics are much different than some of the statistics nationally that I was suggesting.
Right.
So I thought that was a good idea, and that's what prompted the original article, asking the community what they thought.
Okay.
As a result of the second article that shared the results from the community, I have been in touch with Prescott Valley. And there seems to be a sense from the different folks I'm talking about, this is, if there's going to be an initiative, it would probably make more sense to do it on a county level.
Right.
So that's why I'm here this morning, is that folks on this side of Mingus, is this something that people would favor or not? Again, I think there's a lot of solutions, and this is just one.
Right.
And I think it could be targeted, and it could be very humane. I don't mean to be discriminatory, except that I think the discrimination's already happening.
The evidence is in the kennels.
Right, right. That's discriminatory. Putting these animals in shelters and euthanizing them, that's discriminatory. Can we spay and neuter them and reduce the numbers of animals dying? I think that's a solution.
It might be important to let, just for our listeners to understand, that when a pet, any pet, if I understand it right, is adopted from your shelter, from Yavapai Humane Society, they're going to be spayed and or neutered before the adoption occurs. 100%
of the animals we adopt out are spayed and neutered.
So there's no interest from Ed personally, and there's no interest from YHS specifically to foster this.
No,
It's addressing a problem. You mentioned, was it Los Angeles where there was an ordinance about mandatory spay and neuter across all breeds? You said mixed results there. It seems like some folks would say spay and neuter every dog and cat. Why would you not?
Exactly. And the city of Los Angeles did that, and it was considered very innovative, progressive thinking at the time. What it resulted in is people couldn't afford the spay and neuter, so they brought their animals to the shelter, and the number of animals being killed went up.
Some backfire.
Right. So that's why I think there has to be a multi-level approach to solving this problem. Responsible pet ownership, education, spay, neuter, enforcement of leash laws.
It seems like all of the above, it seems like education about spay and neuter, what it is. I mean, I think we've all run into the fellow who, well, I wouldn't want that done to me. But if your dog could choose, I'll bet he might want it done to him.
Right. Well,
if he could understand the behaviors that it'll protect him from, and the situations it'll protect him from. And I mean, I suppose there's a small percentage of legitimate breeders that would have issues with these things, and that could be accounted for. But gosh, it seems like that would be a small sliver of.
But you bring up a good point, and there's actually a national reporter that I was talking to from Animal People magazine, and he was bringing up the point that, is there such a thing as responsible pit bull breeders when 50 to 60% of the animals dying in our shelters are pit bulls?
Yeah.
How responsible is that to be breeding more?
That's a great question. Ed, I really appreciate it. Fascinating study that you did, and addressing a serious problem in the community head-on, so we appreciate that. Yavapai Humane Society, Ed Boakes, the executive director, again, 445-2666. Ed's extension is 21. We thank you for joining us. It's Countywide. We'll see you next time.
This has been County-Wide, a special presentation of Yavapai Broadcasting News. Listen in each Tuesday and Thursday as we tackle the hot topics and talk to the decision makers across Yavapai County. That's County-Wide with Brad Miller and Paul David each Tuesday and Thursday on this Yavapai Broadcasting station.